Hi, hey Russ here. Welcome back to the shop. Today I'm going to do a show me video. It's about a myth that is out there that I decided it's time to just kind of challenge it. And if I'm wrong here, I would love your opinion about why I'm wrong about this. But I want to talk about bandsaw blade, and in particular about bandsaw blade tensioning. Now, yesterday I did one on remote switches, and a guy from Make Things channel, he's a recent fan of mine apparently, and I am definitely a fan of his recently. You should check out his channel. But anyway, he left me a comment that he uses that remote switch setup on his bandsaw to turn his light and his bandsaw on, and that he also, that helps him remember to retension his blade and to turn it and to untension it when he's not using it, because the light would stay on, and that means the blade is tensioned. And that got me to thinking, now it's time to do this show me. Hence, I'm going to explain this to you. You don't need to untension your blade. I've had this saw for 15, 18 years now, and I can tell you right now, I never loosen the blade and take the tension off of it. Whatever blade is in there, I leave it on there. And I never had a problem because of that I can tell. Now, why is that? Well, first off, there's a good chance if you have to untension your belt, otherwise you have a problem with the belt, you're probably tensioning it too much to begin with. There's a lot of say-so about what is the right tensioning. And I've used a lot of different methods, and used the gauges, the push test, I've done everything. What I have found, the easiest thing to work for me is to do what they call the fluttering test. And the nice thing about the fluttering test is it works the same whether you're doing a 1/2 inch blade or a 1/8 inch blade. When you turn it on and you loosen that up until you see that blade fluttering, then you tighten it up 1 turn, 3/4 to 1 turn is all you need. From that point, that blade will stop fluttering. You're tensioned. Now, that's not very much tension on it either, but that's enough tension that it will stay straight as long as you use it properly. That's where the problem is with most people when they think, oh, it's cutting off crooked. And a good example of that is when you're resawing. It goes in straight at the top and you're cutting it through there and you get it out the other side and you look, and on the outside at the bottom, it's off the blade by 1/4 inch. It just kind of went off to the side. The whole blade is going cockeyed on you. That's not a problem with retensioning. That's a problem with the way you did the cut. You did that. You caused that to happen. As long as you know what your blade drift is and you have that compensated for as you're cutting, you let that blade do its work and it will never go off target. It'll stay nice and straight because there's a guide here, there's a guide right under there. That holds this area just as straight as you need it to be. It'll hold it straight there and won't flex as long as you don't tax that blade. So what do I mean by taxing that blade? Here's an example of something I cut just earlier before I started this video because I wanted to get a demo of it. And I cut these 2 pieces off of here. Let me find out where they go. Oh, here we go. Okay. So then this one must be on this side. Whoops, this one is on this side. Ha ha ha. There we go. This one goes here. And this one went over here. Now, when I cut it through, I used my fence on my bandsaw here. And then I just I got it up close, and I clamped it down. We'll do that here in a second. But what I want to show you about this is I did 2 cuts. One with the surface against here on one side. Then once I cut that, I turned it around, and I did the same cut without moving anything on this side. But if you look at this is the cutoff. And if I hold this up right like this, this is, on the one side, the whole thing is nice and flat. That's the side that the flat one where I did that cut, and that came out perfect, top to bottom all the way through. And that's nice and flat on both sides, this surface here. But when I did this side and I pushed it through, I went through really as hard as I could to push it through. And it went through a lot faster. But you see, it also made that cut go from real thick here. This was at the bottom. And it went from the normal size that I was cutting at here, but you can see how the blade drifted at the bottom of the cut down here, and it cut that, and the blade went off to the side. So I ended up with the second piece starting okay, but when it finished, that's what I ended up with. And that's because I went too fast. What is too fast? Well, if you know about table saws, the saw blade on it, you have gullets on there, the little round area underneath the tooth. That's where that sawdust goes as it's digging through. Just think about it. You got a hook coming in here and hooking that in one little channel, and it's hooking that wood, and it's digging down through there. And that gullet is supposed to collect that dirt and keep it out of the way as it goes from the top to the bottom. When you're cutting a skinny piece like this, that gullet isn't going to fill up no matter how fast you go. But on something like this, as that blade starts up here and that gullet starts to fill up, somewhere down through here, that thing's going to get full of sawdust. If it's still cutting, that sawdust has got to go somewhere, period. And what will happen is it'll go to one side of the blade or the other and start going past the blade. And then it will push that blade the other direction. Make it even tighter so the sawdust can't get in on the other side, and all the sawdust is escaping on one side at the lower part of the blade. The deeper you're going through the wood with that tooth, the more sawdust you got there, and the more it's going to try to go over. That's why it always goes offline at the bottom while it's still doing good at the top. You've let that go too fast. And it did not go all the way through before it got too much sawdust. You have to slow down your cut. It's that simple. Now I can take and cut this board. It's a 6-inch maple, and I'll tell you right now, I can cut it with that 1/2 inch 3 TPI blade and get a nice straight cut. Or I can switch this out and put my 1/8 inch blade on there and do the same thing, and I will get the same good cut when I'm done. The only difference is, this will only take me a couple minutes, maybe 3. I don't know until we do it. If you stick around, we're going to cut this, and I'm going to show you how it can keep it straight. But if I did this with my 1/8 inch blade and try to cut this, that's going to take me 4 hours to cut it properly. If it fails, it's because I went too fast and didn't let that blade clear that sawdust that's in that gullet before I kept digging too much. I had too much sawdust in there. It's collecting. So on a 12 tooth per inch blade, the gullets on those are a lot smaller. And so you got to be careful that you're not pushing. You got to give that plenty of time. You can feel that if you feel it, and you have to pay attention to it. The other thing to keep in mind is that once that sawdust is going on one side and it's packed in there as you're going along, it's too late. You can try to straighten it out and get that back in line, but that bottom isn't going to like it. And the bottom of that blade is still going to go do all sorts of weird things because that sawdust is already packed in there. No matter what you think. And you'll never get that blade to track true at that point. Because you've already made it go distorted. So it's very important that you don't let it go off track to begin with. So that's the biggest mistake, and it's the easiest mistake you can make when you're resawing, is that you're just going too fast. You saw how fast I went on that other one? Well, the reason I get that the other day when I did that a couple days ago, that resaw demo, where I cut the curve in the top and the bottom, that works because you had that guide on each side where the sawdust clears quicker. And it helps hold that blade from going off. So the curve works, but you don't have to have that curve. It just makes your cuts easier. So if I wanted to cut this, I could cut this with the 1/8 inch board, like I said. It just would take forever. So that's why you don't want to do it with that 1/8. Heat is the other thing you got to be careful of. You get too much sawdust build up in there, that blade will get hot. And a 1/8 inch blade, 12 tooth per inch, is going to get hot quicker than a 3 tooth 1/2 inch blade. So keep in mind that you got to clear that sawdust. That's the key to the whole thing. So let's take, and I'm going to set this up, and we're going to do a couple of quick cuts just for fun. So the first thing I did is I made sure that my drift is set on my laser light, because that's going to help me do this freehand cut here and keep it straight on line. And I'll show you that as we go along. So you're going to see my laser in action here. So my fence needs to be set to the drift of what this blade is. So I started off by cutting into this board on a straight line that I put on here. And I cut this through until I reached a certain point. And by then I had established the angle I had to hold it at in order for it to cut straight along that line. without having to shift it back and forth. Once you've got that angle, what I do is I take my laser light and I turn it on, and now I adjust this to the edge of my board. So once I turn this until it adjusts to the edge, now I'm not going to turn that because I've already got it set to the drift. Once I've established that drift and now it's recorded on my laser light, it doesn't matter where I put this laser light, that drift is there. So if I want to check this for the drift and see if it's set to it, I can bring this up here and look at it, and then I can make sure that my line is set to that drift. It was off. And so now, real quick, I can set this every time before I use it. If it's important that I have that drift set, I can take that laser light and set it. Now, my fence is set to the drift. I'm ready to use my fence. So now all I have to do, if I want to make a quick cut of something and cut it down, bring my fence over. Set it to where I want to make the cut. That looks like about a 1/16 of an inch. And then I take my piece of wood. Now we're cutting this with the grain horizontal, just like I did on those other boards when I resawed those the other day. That's where the blade would be most apt to mess up. And now I just cut it. So if I take and push this through, we're going to do it on one side, make it nice and slow, make it cut properly. Then I'm going to flip it over so the flat edge of the other side is against the fence. And this one I'm going to ram through as hard as I can. And let's take a quick look at what they look like. And you'll see the difference between this one and that one. And we'll go from there, okay? So, first one up. Let's cut this. And that one is cut pretty straight all the way through. So if I flip it over to the other side, and let's jam this through now. Ready? That wasn't easy to do. But I can tell you right now, on the out of that board, look how thin it is, and on the inside of that board. This thing also is thinner at the bottom, up here, than it is down here. That blade went cattywampus off of the plane of where I was cutting. This side came out pretty smooth, and this side came out really bad when you look down through here and see the flatness of the board. So you can see now it does make a difference. So just for grins, I'm going to take and let's cut this thing real quick. So I'm going to put that in here, and I'm going to use this push block here to help control the push. And let's see what we can do here with this, okay? So let's turn it on. Now we got to take it slow because we're cutting 6 inches of hard maple here, right? So bring that up. And now lesson learned. Right here, this blade just popped off behind my bearing, so it went back further at the top. What does that tell me? My blade is still not tensioned enough. So I'm going to tension this another half a turn, and let's do this again. Let's see where we're at now. Let's see if we have that same problem with it popping off that bearing. So And of course that went way off because I pushed too hard. I popped it off the bearing. So your tension is important. Excuse me. Your tension is important to keep it tight enough without it being too tight that it moves too much. This probably would not have happened, to be honest with you, even with that tension I had. It's this bearing here is probably not quite close enough on this side. And I can see there's a pretty good gap there, so that allowed this thing to actually move over. So this actually, when it pushed that blade, it made it actually flex. So that's why your adjustment is critical, but I don't go by that. In this particular method that you just saw, this failure, it does happen once in a while, but when it does that, all I have to do is take it and retension this a little more. And now that I'm set up and I do the recut, and this time it won't have a problem. And actually, that board came out pretty straight now. But you can't see it on this side. But that board came out pretty straight all the way through. So I did that cut freehand on a 6-inch wide board. And I will tell you, being a narrow board this way, it made it a little difficult to go through. This is much easier on a longer board. But as you can see, I still was able to make a pretty good straight cut without any kerf already pre-cut in it on hard maple, and I was able to go through this blade and make a nice clean cut that actually came out pretty well. So blade tension is important. You can have failure, but when you do, think about what happened and you can also fix that. As you saw, this time I didn't have a problem with that blade jumping. I didn't have it quite tight enough, but it's still pretty loose. This blade is not very tight. It's probably one turn. I think I only turned it 3/4 of a turn when I tightened it, and I probably should go on a 1/2-inch blade. I should go about one full turn to a turn and a quarter. On a smaller blade like a 1/8, I probably wouldn't over tighten that much even, because those blades are more narrow. They'll stretch easier, so it's just a matter of judging that. And after you do this for a while, you'll learn to get a feel for the blades as to which ones you really want to get tightened to the place that you're comfortable. So, but blade tension, don't believe everything you've heard, because blade tension is not really what causes this thing to go off. It's how fast you cut through there. You got to give that word time to clear. And as long as your blade is in the guides properly, it'll guide you through, no problem. Just don't overwork it. So, anyway, I want to thank you for being here. This thing went a little longer than I thought it would, and I hoped it would. Maybe I should have done it without this, but that's the only piece of 6-inch I kind of have right now, so I can't set this up and redo the video. So, at this point, hopefully you learned something here, and you understand what all I'm talking about. And tensioning, you don't have to really keep that that blade too tight. That's usually the biggest problem, is you over tighten it. So, and if it isn't all that tight, you don't have to loosen it all the time. My opinion, that's what I found. Share your stories about it. I would appreciate it. Keep it in mind. But try what I'm talking about. Just tighten them up a little bit and then keep that blade on there and keep it tension and see what happens to that blade for you. I've never really had a problem that I could tell that ever failed simply because I didn't have it tight enough. The only failure I got here, and the reason I got the failure here, was when it wasn't tensioned. It didn't allow that to pop behind this back bearing. I knew immediately what it was, why it did it. I readjusted it slightly and made the cut, and the cut went fine the second time. So, and once you're set up, you're good. I was playing with that adjustment. That's why it was probably a little out of adjustment anyway. I wasn't really paying attention. I was videoing. But honestly, that doesn't happen when you tension it with only about a 1 turn revolution on your turn knob once you get it to stop fluttering. So the flutter wheel, that's the best way to tension the blade properly, in my opinion. If you have any questions about this, there's a lot here. And hopefully I showed you what I was talking about. If you want to debate it, give me a holler, leave some comments. If you like this video, say so. Most importantly, please come back again. And I want to thank you for staying to the end this time, because this thing was really too long. Thanks, and thanks for your patience. We'll see you again very soon.